Alrighty, on to the last trope talk, and I will be all caught up. Ooh, this is color-coded team with a theme, which is a bit on brand, because OSP is a color-coded team with a theme. Which is really, yeah. I'm surprised she hasn't done this one sooner, because Red does the her theme is mythology and the stories and stuff like that, and then Blue is the history. He's the history nerd. That's funny. I'm surprised. I'm now that I'm thinking about that. How has she not done this sooner? But anyways, let's dive right in.
Did you know I make a comic? Did you know that comic is getting turned into a physical book? If you don't, it's probably because I never talk about it. I have been advised to talk about it. So, if you're interested in high fantasy, superheroics, both of those things at once somehow, that is kind of the entire gimmick of my comic, which is called Aurora. There is a pre-order link in the description for volume 1 of the comic, which is the first 11 chapters. But also, if you are impatient and want to read the whole thing right now, it is all available on the website comicaurora.com. And if that sounds kind of cool, or if you just want to see me put my money where my mouth is where it comes to writing, feel free to check it out. Have fun. Please don't break my website this time. Okay, bye.
They broke her website again, I'm guessing?
Modern discourse and reinterpretation around superheroes often likes to talk about how superheroes are modern-day gods, with the tales of grand conflicts taking the role that used to be filled with myths and legends. And as something of a myth and legend aficionado, I think this is wrong. Gods aren't just the myths where they get to gallivant around and kick ass. They're also sets of real applicable social rules that shape how you should operate in your given society.
Thank you. Yep, I'm not going to expand further because that's just spot on.
As defined by the powers that embody it. To look at a god and see only the wacky stories about them is to disregard everything that made them culturally significant. And I love superheroes, but they're nowhere near foundational enough to be gods. They're knights. Arthuriana has had way more...
Hold on, let me think on this for a second. Hold up. I have never heard the perspective of modern superheroes are just Arthurian knights. She's not wrong. She's not wrong.
Cultural impact than I think a lot of people realize, and a lot of that has been by shaping the tropes of what it looks like when a small elite team of badasses dedicate themselves to the protection of those who cannot protect themselves. Now obviously this romantic chivalric ideal has very little to do with real historical knights who spent most of their time getting shuffled off on crusades or other excuses to bully their neighbors so they would have other people to kill instead of tearing up their home turf, but the legend of the Round Table has produced this enduring idea that some people, whether through intensive training or inborn talent or a blend of both, can become motivated, empowered, and equipped to go out and fight evil as part of a team. Their origin stories are many and varied, but they're all united in a common cause and a common loyalty to the ideals of justice. Maybe they even have the help of a wise old wizardly mentor to guide them, and some of them will bring along a young squire at their side to help out while they learn how to be a true hero in their own right. Then they go out into the world and fight strange enemies with confounding powers, sorceresses or creatures or enemy knights serving dark powers, and it wouldn't hurt to rescue a few fair maidens along the way. And this inspiration is no secret. A full half of Batman's epithets have something of the Round Table about them, from the Dark Knight to the Caped Crusader, and basically anyone whose power is power armor or cool sword or shield is gonna end up with the symbolism laid on pretty thick. Not to mention Aquaman is literally a King Arthur. The interesting thing about knights in comparison to modern superheroes is that with knights, the power curve is a lot more narrow. Everyone is basically operating with the same tools, the same kind of armor, weapons, steeds, etc. Sometimes someone might have the advantage of height or training or pure moral righteousness or just plain raw skill, and some of the knights had fun little quirks that gave them advantages, but there was nothing comparable to the power gap you get in basically every big-name super team these days. With chivalric knights, you can't really get anything that matches the vibe of Thor and Hawkeye being in the same group chat. Modern superhero teams are usually a much more eclectic bunch, with diverse origins, powers, and power scaling, leading to an environment where their uniqueness forms a good chunk of the appeal of the big team-up tales. But that's not the case with every superhero team. See, there's a specific kind of superhero who isn't an independent badass marching to the beat of their own drum who then chooses to join up with some kind of crime-fighting book club. Some superheroes start off as a matched set, originating alongside the rest of their team and sharing not just their general power set, but also an overarching gimmick that continues to bind them together. These superheroes almost don't exist in isolation. Their primary role is that they are part of the team. Specifically, the color-coded team with a theme. The color-coded team with a theme starts off very simply, with a shared shared superhero origin. It doesn't technically have to happen simultaneously for everyone involved, but it usually does for the sake of convenience, though it might take some time for these characters to realize they've been part of the same mass empowering event and find one another. And apart from being shared between characters, the origin story can be basically anything. A team of Power Rangers are bestowed their transformation trinkets by a mentor figure who deems them worthy. The Ninja Turtles get doused with mutation goo and grow up to be Ninja Turtles. The Sailor Scouts get reincarnated as mild-mannered schoolgirls until their magical animal sidekick can awaken their latent powers. Superhero origins can be basically anything, and so can communal superhero origins as long as they're shared. This lays the groundwork for the team with the theme by bestowing upon them a communal baseline that they're all going to be operating with. This is also where we start setting some boundaries on what constitutes a team with a theme. Because a shared origin story or basic premise behind their superpowers is important, but it doesn't always produce a team with a theme. Consider the X-Men, who are united in their superhero origins being mutant, but each individual mutant is completely unique to the point where even mutants that are immediate family can have completely different powers from one another. Thus, even though the X-Men have a much more cohesive narrative than a lot of superhero teams, they still feel a lot more like your Avengers and Justice Leagues when it comes to the grouping of the power sets. It's objectively bonkers that, technically speaking, Storm has the same kind of superpower as Jubilee. They're a team, but they don't have much in the way of power coordination. Some of them have elemental powers, some of them have physical mutations with varying degrees of tragic angst attached, a statistically significant number of them are blue for some reason. They share an in-universe justification.
Listen, that's just because blue is the best color. Alright.
But almost none of these powers feel like variations on any sort of central theme. So it's not enough for the origin to be shared. The powers also have to feel similar to each other, and that's where the team with a theme comes in. Everyone on the team has to have powers or abilities that, structurally speaking, are very similar to one another. Now, there's obviously a lot of room for flexibility here when it comes to defining what constitutes a similar power set, but a lot of this is a strictly vibes-based assessment. Consider the Ninja Turtles. Each of them uses a different weapon, but they all use weapons and are starting from the basic premise of ninja training. So even if they have disparate movesets...
Okay, but you could make the argument that the superheroes have powers, right? Because weapons are very broad and, you know, well, I guess powers can be a bit more broad than weapons-ish.
That's because fighting with a staff is going to look very different from fighting with nunchucks. In the grand scheme, these still feel like very similar skill sets. Every Power Ranger operates in the same general space of improbably acrobatic fight choreography with a uniquely toyetic weapon and Zord to keep them distinct, but not too distinct. Each pilot of Voltron forms a different part of the giant robot and might have a different sidearm, but they're all starting from the premise of pilots a big robot lion. And there is some room for flexibility here. A lot of magical girl teams, for instance, seemingly have very different power sets for each of the girls involved, but there'll still be a core theme present tying them together. The Sailor Scouts all have very different elemental or energy powers and unique accessories with useful abilities, but they're also all associated with planets, and their powers are derived from those planets' corresponding alchemical and or mythological elemental associations. And when later seasons start introducing more magical girls, they still all have space-related associations and vibes. The theming is rock solid, but that still leaves a lot of room for variation. And even within the core cast, the ability to chuck a fireball is useful in very different circumstances to the ability to fill an area with obscuring mist. Just because the power sets are thematic with one another doesn't mean they need to be completely interchangeable in the actual effects they're capable of. And in fact, it's narratively beneficial to ensure that the power sets aren't interchangeable, and everyone's got at least one strength that makes them uniquely suited to solve some specific problems. Color-coded teams with a theme actually frequently give their members elemental associations, which usually plays into the color coding, of course. This is a very useful way to ensure that the characters all have different strengths and weaknesses, that their powers all look different so it's easy to tell who's doing what, and that different characters can be uniquely challenged.
And it gets you an understanding of their personality without necessarily, like, you see a, just because of how historically, it continues to be written, a fire-wielding sort of character is, always going to be seen as hot-headed. Which is why they have Korra use firebending way more than her own natural water bending, which I think was a mistake. But I understand, like, they should have skipped like multiple generations. They should have skipped like what would they? Let's see. After Korra, it's Earth's, and then after Earth, it's fire. They should have just skipped to the next a firebending avatar. A Fire Nation avatar is the next one. Skip a couple of generations. Get far away from the original series. But I also understand that immediately following Avatar is like, they probably had to in terms of like a marketing reason for people to watch the show. Like, still, from a writing perspective, would have been better if you're trying to have a hot-headed character and your previously established themes and stuff, right? I mean, Katara was a bit hot-headed in a way, in her own way. But like, just the Korra could have been done better
by putting them in different situations. But even if the elemental coding of the character's power set is unique, when it comes to a color-coded team with a theme, the characters can't get too unique or they'll start to lose that team cohesion. A party like Team Avatar has elemental theming and color coding aplenty, but they don't have the design cohesion that defines most color-coded teams with a theme, and instead come across as a bunch of very different people teaming up because they're choosing to, not because they're a matched set of minor variants on a core design philosophy. This is reflected in their movesets, which are all extremely distinct from one another. Even the most basic chuck an element at someone's head move looks and works totally differently when it's done by Toph versus
until Legend of Korra, and I'm sure they did it for, like, I understand the in-universe logic behind it, and it's not a bad idea. However, I think it took away from a lot of the beauty of the Avatar universe by having everyone's movesets start to look the freaking same in Korra.
When it's done by Katara. They don't feel like stock animation elemental reskins of the same energy blast. They feel like unique manifestations both of the properties of the element itself and the personality and training of the character using it, and they play into the choreography very differently depending on the specific situation they're used in. This uniqueness of moveset is very rare in full-blown color-coded teams with a theme, where most of the character's primary abilities in combat will break down into the same general space of color-coded basic attack with a stock animation, stronger attack with a longer stock animation they unlock in Season 2, neither of which will do much more than scratch any villains of the week past their introductory episode, and a big finishing move to end the episode. Basically, in a color-coded team with a theme, the character's powers can have different effects while still being thematically and structurally extremely similar, while in more loosely defined superhero teams, the power sets will have different effects and none of that structural and mechanical similarity that makes every Sailor Scout kind of feel like they're mashing the same buttons on the controller. That's not to say these characters are interchangeable. In fact, one benefit of holding the power sets relatively constant is that it gives the writers space to concentrate on elements of characterization that set the teammates apart. It's extremely common for color-coded teams with a theme to fall very strongly into the archetypes of a five-man band, and that's only slightly because that trope was codified about Power Rangers in the first place.
And I think it's to the benefit of the color-coded team. I will forever be a defender of trope, I will never bet unless it's a bad trope. Like, I will rarely bash a trope, and for people sticking to that trope, like, color-coded team with a theme, like, by design, just fits so neatly into the five-man band and some other tropes that we have talked about before. And so lean into it. Don't pull away from that, because I think that then weakens the color-coded team with a theme trope. Just go into the trope. You don't have to reinvent every trope. You don't have to find some different way to present a trope. Sometimes just doing the trope as it's traditionally been done, but using your own voice is enough to make it unique.
Characters all have very similar physical abilities, it becomes less important to highlight what they all can do, and more interesting to unpack what each of them chooses to do. Even if everyone on the team is capable of roughly the same space of ass-kicking, the designated smart guy is going to engage with the battlefield very differently to the designated angry guy. And in their downtime between fights, they've probably got some very unique personal arcs or struggles going on to keep things interesting in the B-plot zone. And because stories of this variety very commonly focus on highlighting teamwork above all else, it is an absolute rule of the narrative that everybody has to contribute to the story. It's quite common for every member of the team to wind up getting at least a little time in the spotlight to highlight their unique contributions to the group and how they're vital to the team composition, even if they think they're lame or weak or unhelpful or not as cool as their frontliner teammates. Usually these episodes will put in a lot of work to explain how exactly this character's unique skill set really does benefit the team, and how they are all equal contributors and all equally vital. But I'd actually call this a bit of
Man, I would love a true high-budget, well-written Power Ranger thing. Like, the Power Ranger wackiness, and like part of the appeal of Power Rangers is their kind of cheap kind of vibe feel in terms of film quality. But like, I don't know, I just love the concept of the Power Rangers that I want. Make another attempt at a movie, at a high-budget movie like was attempted in the 20-teens. Do it again, but better.
A double-edged sword. See, because the color-coded team with a theme operates as a matched set, it's frequently kind of rare for the team to undergo any sort of major party splitting or anything that really alters the structure of the team. This is unique to this specific slice of superheroics, since more eclectic superhero teams have no such limitation. It's easy to give a character a solo arc or split off 2 or 3 team members that maybe haven't had much time to chat, and just let them hang out or banter or deal with a fun little problem on the side. Sometimes you'll even get scenarios where the entire team is in trouble and it's up to one member of the team to die hard everybody else out of danger, and a unique opportunity to show off their personal skills. But this kind of scoped-in focus episode is very rare in color-coded teams with a theme, and I think that's for a few reasons, the most important one being purely mechanical. See, lots of color-coded teams with a theme sort of operate on a threat of the week genre model that follows a very strict formula outside of important season finales, which can be very unpredictable and status quo breaking, but the mid-season episode-to-episode playing out of these stories will usually almost all be very similar. That formula is as follows. The overarching, inaccessible big bads schemes in their secret evil lair with their 1 to 4 incompetent lackeys bantering by their side, and constructs a new villain of the week to cause problems in theoretical service to their large-scale evil plan. The villain of the week gets unleashed on an unsuspecting township that looks suspiciously like a backlot in Japan. Our heroes disengage from their B-plots to notice the threat. Everyone suits up to fight it. Our heroes might get to take out a small army of interchangeable minions before they turn their attention to the main problem of the week, take turns using their weakest attacks, realize they aren't working, then switch to taking turns using their slightly more powerful attacks, which also will not work. Sometimes this is when the villain of the week undergoes a transformation, or unlocks a second health bar, or gets real big. Then our heroes decide to switch from doing the things that never work to doing the thing that always works, and will unleash some sort of big finishing move, which can involve combining into a big robot, or combining everyone's weapons into a big weapon, but can also just be a specialized move from the designated most important member of the team. And we'll get back to that guy in a minute, but just by looking at this formula, we can see why it would be kind of tricky to make a full episode about any specific subset of these characters, since the rhythm of every major fight is basically the same, and it can't end unless all the heroes combine their powers in some way to take out the monster of the week. In fact, it's very common for shows of this specific variety to have an episode where one of the characters spends most of the runtime refusing the call and being unwilling or unable to participate, and the rest of the team spends the entire fight scene getting their asses kicked while they lament that they can't do this without the whole team being present and accounted for, and their missing buddy then turns up at the very last minute to set things right. So while the episode's character-driven B-plot might focus on only a small subset of the cast, the combat encounters are all going to play out mostly on formula and mandate that the entire team is present to play their required parts. And while there's lots of room for fun characterization within the confines of this formula, I do think this is a weakness that more loosely structured superhero teams don't deal with as much. I mean, there's nothing stopping a color-coded team with a theme from doing one of those more small-scope character-focused stories, or from mixing up the fight choreography, or even from letting someone other than the designated specialist guy get the final blow once in a while. But in the series that are more married to the genre conventions, you're usually not going to see that very often. And on the subject of the designated specialist guy, we should really talk about that, because they're a pretty significant element in the formula. Sometimes the color-coded team with a theme has a team leader, with some kind of chosen one specialness about them that sets them.
And usually they are red, I think. That applies to the Power Rangers.
Their powers apart from everyone else. This specialness can take a lot of forms, but mechanically speaking, they're usually the one whose job it is to dole out the big finishing blows. If they're part of a team with a combining giant robot, they probably form the head and call the shots when they bust out the big sword. In a Magical Girl series, they might be the only one who can bust out the
Sailor Moon is a bit... I wouldn't say Sailor Moon has the red theme.
Unfuck the consequences of this bad guy power. Color coding wise, they can vary a lot, but their outfit will usually have some kind of bonus fanciness compared to the rest of the team, like gold trim or an extra ruffly petticoat. Now, in stories that feature these guys, a predictable phenomenon can start to arise. When you have a team of people who are all important, but there's one person on the team who's really important, everyone else can start to feel very interchangeable and broadly not all that useful. And I think this is a fairly unique problem to this specific flavor of superhero team, where everyone is ostensibly a color-coordinated variant on a baseline core theme. More eclectic hero menageries might have someone on the team who is the strongest or heaviest hitter, but they're usually not also narratively designated as God's favorite princess. And correspondingly, while every superhero team arguably has the designated most useless member, that character probably gets at least a few days in the limelight to justify why it's such a good idea to keep them around. The idea that, narratively speaking, everyone on the team is approximately equally badass and needs to be there, but there's only one person in the series who's allowed to win fights, can be a little bit weird in a Monster of the Week story format with a fight every episode. Now, some of this can be counterbalanced by a changing status quo. The series that personally bothered me the most with this phenomenon was Sailor Moon, because basically every other Sailor Scout starts off unable to end fights without Usagi, and then winds up power-scaled into irrelevance every time Sailor Moon adds a new ribbon to her uniform. But, to its credit, the story does some hard work to avoid Monster of the Week monotony, mostly by ensuring that the composition of the core cast varies wildly even within the space of a single season. It takes a good chunk of the first season to assemble the whole core squad, so the early episodes are operating with a skeleton crew, and subsequent seasons shake things up even further, which means even though it is extremely formulaic in its villain of the week model, and even though Sailor Moon is mechanically the only person who's allowed to get the finishing blow on basically any bad guy, the individual fights can still play out in very different ways, as new allies with unclear motivations tag in and out of the storylines, changing the formula and introducing new dramas into the character-driven B-plots. This is also a phenomenon I got to observe in my limited experience with Power Rangers, because even though many of the series have some designated cool guy 6th Ranger who shows up with extra special cool guy powers in a uniform that is simultaneously thematic with the others while still being uniquely radical, those characters rarely become permanent additions to the core cast without some sort of caveat to keep them from one-shotting everything. And as a bonus, the power sets in those shows can, with some shenanigans, be transferred between different characters. Power sets and costume upgrades change hands, and allies tag in and out of the story, including some of those power curve-breaking extra special cool guys, and that helps spare the rest of the cast from falling into general irrelevance. And this is actually one of the strengths of the color-coded team with the theme. By removing some of the wild chaos of your average superhero team, smaller alterations to the status quo can have comparatively much larger effects. It's really not all that important if one or two members of the Avengers take a sick day, but the audience will sit up and take notice if any of the Ninja Turtles isn't present and accounted for, and heaven forbid one of them gets too beat up to participate in the plot. A new superhero turning up to help out for an episode of Justice League is so normal it's not even worth commenting on, but a new person turning up in a unique colored costume that is otherwise perfectly thematically resonant with your close-knit team of 5 best friends is going to be an absolutely enormous deal with huge implications. An X-Men villain of the week might easily shrug off most of the team's finishing moves and require a more clever approach, but if the Tokusatsu monster of the week manages to shrug off the finishing move that always works, everyone is going to shit their spandex. The more ironclad a story's formula is, the more impactful any disruption to that formula is going to be.
Yes.
And the color-coded team with a theme is an incredibly rigidly formulaic trope, to the point where it's considered a significant break from the norm if the red guy isn't either in charge or really mad about not
Okay, so I was right about the red guy, like, always being the leader.
being in charge. Its formulaic qualities can be seen as a weakness, but I think if they were really that much of a problem, we wouldn't have 10 million of these things.
Exactly.
Sometimes a story with a formula is just a way to guaranteed get a whole lot of the things you like. So, yeah.
Damn right. And that was Trope Talk color-coded team with a theme. God, I love that title. Really didn't have much to say, though, because this isn't a thing that I write, nor is it one that I read much. It was something I consumed a lot as a kid, of course. It's kind of where this trope kind of leans itself most into. But it's still a good trope. I still enjoy the pretty much stereotypical aspects of this trope on a thematic level. Just not something I've been interested in. It just doesn't fit my writing or much of my interests of the modern day. But yeah, hopefully Red goes back to some more, he's been on a streak of tropes that I feel like I don't really have much experience with. And I would like her to go back to the tropes that I have more knowledge of. So I feel like I have more to talk about, so I can yap. I haven't had a good, really long trope talk yap in a hot minute, I feel like. I'm overdue for one. Like, please, Red. Please. But I don't know if there are really any tropes left that, can't think of any off the top of my head that she has not done. So, we'll see. Next video.